Welcome to Archive Whispers, a place to fall asleep. Settle in, lower the lights, and let the archive open. Tonight, the place we are going to go to is not a house, or a hall, or a quiet room with a single lamp, but a garden, an old temple garden in the hills at the edge of Kyoto, on a morning when it has been raining since long before the light. It is the kind of garden that was made slowly, over many lifetimes, by people whose names have mostly been let go. And it is the kind of rain that does not fall so much as settle, a fine and steady gray that has soaked the moss and darkened the stones and drawn a soft veil of mist across the hills behind. We are not going to hurry through it. We are simply going to stand at its edge, in the dark and the wet, and let the morning come up around us as slowly as it likes. We are not going to witness anything of importance here. No festival is being kept this morning. No great teacher is expected. No famous visitor is going to arrive at the gate and be received. We are not even going to follow a single person through the garden, because at this hour, in this weather, there is hardly anyone to follow. Only a gardener somewhere among the trees, and perhaps a single monk sweeping a veranda under shelter, and the rain, which belongs to no one. Instead, we are going to keep company with the garden itself, with its stones and its water and its slow green moss, across one gray and unremarkable morning, from the dark before the light, through the long misted hours, to the late part of the morning when the rain has settled into a steady and patient hush and shows no sign at all of stopping. I should say, before we begin, that the life of a garden such as this is not a thing we have had to invent. A good deal of it is known, and known carefully, from the people who made these gardens, and from the people who wrote about them. The oldest of the gardening texts, the one called the Sakuteki, comes down to us from the 11th century, and it speaks, in its quiet way, of setting stones according to their own desire, and of following the lay of the land rather than forcing it. For the patient modern understanding of these places, we have leaned on the work of Lorraine Cook, of Mark Keene, of Gunter Nitschke, and David Slauson, among others. The fuller list waits in the description below, should you ever wish to walk these wet paths yourself by daylight. What we are going to do then is to imagine a single ordinary temple garden on a single rainy morning, and to move through it slowly, in roughly the order the morning itself would unfold. We will begin outside, at the gate, in the dark and the early rain, and then we will come in along the wet path, past the water basin and the lanterns, to the edge of the pond. We will look, for a long while, at the stones and the raked gravel and the slow green moss, and at the koi turning somewhere beneath the surface, and we will sit on the veranda where it is dry and listen to the rain on the eaves. Nothing in particular is going to happen. That, in its way, is the whole of it. A garden in the rain asks nothing of you at all, except, perhaps, that you slow down enough to notice it, and even that it asks very gently. So if you are able, dim your lights now, and let the room around you grow as soft and gray as a garden under early rain. There is nothing here you need to follow, and nothing you need to remember. If your attention begins to drift, let it drift. And if you fall asleep somewhere in the long gray middle of the morning, while the rain is still falling and the mist has not yet lifted, then the garden will have done for you exactly what such a morning was always quietly meant to do. Settle in, let your breath slow until it matches the soft and even falling of the rain, and let us go down, together and entirely unhurried, into the wet green quiet of the garden. At this hour, the garden is still more sound than shape. The light has not yet come, or it has come only as a faint graying of the dark, a thinning rather than a dawn. And so the first thing we are given is not the look of the place, but the sound of it. The long, even, unbroken sound of rain falling on a great many different surfaces at once. There is the soft hiss of it on the gravel, and the deeper patter on the broad wet leaves, and the steady run of it from the edge of the gate roof, gathering and dropping, in a rhythm so regular that it has already begun to feel less like weather and more like the breathing of the place itself. The gate itself is a modest thing, far more modest than the word might suggest. A simple roofed structure of dark cedar that has stood through more rains than anyone could count. Its timbers gone the deep gray-brown of old wood that has been wet and dry and wet again 10,000 times over. There is no grand door to swing open, only a low threshold beam worn smooth and shallow by generations of feet, stepping carefully across it, and a heavy tiled roof above, sagging just slightly at its center, that keeps a narrow strip of dry ground beneath it even now. To step under that roof, out of the falling rain, and into the sudden hush of its shelter, is already to have arrived somewhere, to have crossed, in a single quiet pace, from the ordinary world outside into the slower world within. Beyond the gate the path begins, and it is worth pausing over the path, because in a garden of this kind, almost nothing is left to chance, and the path least of all. It is laid out in stepping stones, flat, irregular stones set a single comfortable pace apart, sunk just into the surface of the dark earth so their tops lie level with the moss around them. They do not run straight. They bend and pause and gather and divide, and they were placed, every one of them, by a hand that thought carefully about where the foot would wish to fall and where the eye would wish to rest, so that to walk them is to be slowed very gently and turn this way and that, and made to look down at the wet stone and then up again at the gray garden, in a rhythm someone decided upon long ago. The air along the path has a smell that belongs entirely to mornings like this one, and it is one of the quiet pleasures of arriving early in the rain. It is the smell of wet earth, first of all dark and mineral and faintly sweet, the smell that rises whenever a long dryness has finally been soaked through. Beneath it there is the resin smell of wet cedar from the gate and the posts, and beneath that again, the green, cold, slightly bitter smell of moss and soaked leaves, and over all of it the clean, almost scentless coolness of the rain itself, which seems less a smell than a kind of clearing away of every other smell, leaving the air rinsed and plain and very easy to breathe. A little way along the path, set low to the ground in a hollow of dark gravel, there is a stone water basin, a tsukubai, and it has been placed deliberately low, so that anyone who wishes to use it must first crouch down to reach it. This was never an accident. The bending is the point. A guest arriving at such a garden, in the older custom, would stop here and rinse the hands and the mouth with the cold water, partly for cleanliness and partly for something older than cleanliness. A small act of setting aside the dust of the road and the noise of the day before going further in. This morning, the basin needs no filling. The rain has filled it and is filling it still, brimming it gently over its dark mossy lip in a thin, unhurried thread that falls back into the gravel below. Beside the basin, just where a hand would reach for it, lies a ladle of pale bamboo, its handle gone soft and gray with weather, resting across the stone the way it has been left 1,000 mornings before this one. There is a whole quiet art to such small wooden things in a garden of this kind, an art of choosing what is plain over what is fine, what is worn over what is new, what looks as though it has always simply been here over what looks as though it has been bought and placed. The bamboo is hollow and light and faintly green where the rain keeps it damp, and when a drop falls into its open mouth, it gives back the smallest hollow note, a sound so slight that you would only catch it if everything else were as still as it is now. It is worth remembering, as we stand here in the wet, that gardens like this one did not arrive in the world already finished, and that the form of them was a long time in the making. The earliest of the great Japanese gardens, more than 1,000 years ago, in the age the historians call the Heian, were the pleasure gardens of the aristocracy, broad ponds with islands and winding shores, laid out beside the wide wooden halls of the nobility, where boats might be poled across the water and music carried over it on warm evenings. Much of the thinking behind them came, in the first place, from China, carried over the sea along with so much else, and reshaped, slowly, into something that belonged to these islands and to no other place. In time, and especially as the temples took up the making of gardens, the purpose of them quietly changed. They became less a place to hold a party on the water, and more a place to sit and look, and to think, or to set thinking down altogether. The pond and the island remained in many of them, but they were joined now by other kinds of garden, by gardens of raked gravel and standing stones meant to be viewed from a wooden floor rather than walked through at all, and by the small enclosed gardens that led a guest, stone by stone, toward a hut where tea would be made. The garden we are standing in this morning holds a little of all of these, gathered together over centuries, the way an old house gathers the furniture of many lives. The oldest written thoughts we have on how to make such a garden come from a text set down in the 11th century, a manual now known as the Sakuteki, the record of garden making, which has been read and copied and quietly argued over ever since. It is a strange and lovely document, part practical instruction and part something closer to a meditation, and the advice it gives is not the advice of a man imposing his will on the land. It speaks instead of studying the lay of the ground and of recalling the famous landscapes one has seen, and, most memorably of all, of setting each stone in accordance with its request, as though the stone itself had a wish about how it wanted to be placed, and the work of the gardener were chiefly to listen. Whether or not a stone can truly have a wish is not a question the old text seems much troubled by, and standing here this morning, it does not trouble us either. What the saying really means, one comes to feel, is something more like patience, a long looking at the thing in front of you until its own shape begins to suggest what should be done with it, rather than the other way about. It is a way of working that does not hurry and does not force, and is content to let the rightness of a thing reveal itself slowly, and it has left its mark on every part of this garden, on the turn of the path and the lean of the stones and the open spaces between them, that have been just as carefully left empty as the rest has been filled. By now, the light has come up enough to be called a morning, though it is the grayest kind of morning, a light without a source, spread evenly through the rain and the low clouds so that nothing throws a shadow, and everything is lit softly and from everywhere at once. It is, in its way, the most flattering light a garden of this kind could ask for. The harsh brightness of a clear noon would flatten the moss and harden the stones and bleach the careful grays to a glare. But this soft and shadowless gray deepens every color it touches, draws the green up out of the moss and the dark up out of the wet wood, and lets the whole garden settle into the muted, even, slightly melancholy key in which it was always meant to be seen. Somewhere off among the trees, almost lost in the steady sound of the rain, there is a gardener at work, and we will not go and find him, because to go and find him would be to make the morning into a story about a person, And this morning is not about anyone, but it is a comfort, somehow, to know He is there, moving slowly along the far paths with a basket and a worn blade, lifting a fallen branch here and easing a choked drain there, doing the small, endless work that a garden in the rain always quietly asks for. The care that made this place is not finished and set aside. It goes on every morning, including this one, in the wet, under the dripping trees, mostly unseen. Let us leave the gate behind us then, and the basin, and the long, careful path, and let us come at last to the heart of the garden, to the edge of the pond, where there is a broad sheltered veranda of dark wood under deep eaves, dry beneath the falling rain, from which the whole of the garden can be seen at once. This is where a visitor was always meant to end up, and where a visitor was always meant to stop, and it is where we are going to settle ourselves for a good long while. There is a worn wooden rail to lean against, and the steady curtain of the rain falling just past the eaves, and the gray pond below, and beyond it all the soft and shifting wall of the mist. And there is, this morning, absolutely nowhere else that we need to be. From the veranda, with the rain falling steadily just beyond the eaves, the whole shape of the garden lies open before us, and we can begin to see how carefully it has all been arranged. At the center of it is the pond, a low, irregular sheet of gray water held in a soft outline of dark earth and stone, and it does not pretend to be a perfect circle or a tidy basin. Its shoreline wanders in and out, hiding a little here behind a low headland and opening there into a shallow bay, so that from no single place can the whole edge of it be seen at once, and the eye is always given a little more to go and find. A great deal of thought went into making the water look as though no thought had gone into it at all. Out in the pond there are islands, or rather, there are two low rises of rock and planting that the water surrounds, and they are not there merely to be pretty. In the old language of these gardens, islands of this kind carried meanings that everyone once understood, and the two most beloved of them were the crane and the turtle, the two creatures that the old stories held to live for 1,000 and for 10,000 years. One island, long and low with a single leaning pine, stands for the turtle. The other, narrower, with a stone set upright like a folded wing, stands for the crane, and together they quietly wish upon the garden and everyone in it the oldest wish there is, which is simply to go on and to last and to endure. Reaching out toward the nearer island there is a bridge, though it is the plainest bridge imaginable, only a single long slab of dark stone laid flat from the bank to a stepping rock and on to the island's edge, worn slightly hollow along its middle and slick now with the rain. It does not arch, and it does not have a rail, and it makes no attempt to draw attention to itself as a piece of building. It is simply a way across, laid down with the same patience as the path, and yet there is something about a flat stone bridge over gray water in the rain, glistening and low and going quietly from one small place to another, that holds the eye far longer than anything grander would. If we lift our eyes from the pond and look past the far shore, we find that the garden does not really end where its wall ends. Beyond the low boundary, the wooded hills rise up and away, dim and layered and softened by the rain, and they have been drawn into the composition as deliberately as anything within the garden itself. The makers of these places had a word for it, a borrowing of the living scenery, the practice of arranging the near things so that the far things, the hills and the distant trees that no one owns and no one can move, become part of the picture too. This morning the mist is doing half the work, blurring the line between what was planted and what was always there, until the garden seems to reach all the way back into the hills and lose itself among them. Nearer to hand, along one side of the pond, there is a wide bed of pale gravel raked into long, even furrows, and although the rain has dimpled and softened it this morning, the lines are still there, running in patient parallel curves around the base of a few set stones. This raked gravel is one of the strangest and most quietly beautiful inventions of these gardens, because it is water that is not water. The long combed lines are meant to read as ripples, as the slow swell of a sea or the current of a wide river, and the stones rising from them as islands or as boats, so that a garden with no pond at all can still, in its way, be mostly water, a still gray ocean that never moves and never dries, and asks only to be looked at. There is a kind of garden, made most often at the temples of the meditating schools, in which there is no real water anywhere at all, only this raked gravel and a handful of stones set within it, and nothing else. No pond, no bridge, no flowers, no path to walk. Such a garden is meant to be seen from a single wooden veranda and never entered, the way a painting is meant to be seen from in front of it and never walked into, and the famous ones are very spare indeed, a few stones in a sea of raked gray, arranged so that, from the place where one is meant to sit, one or two of the stones are always hidden from view, so that the whole can never be wholly grasped, only sat with and returned to, and slowly let in. Off to one side, where a thin channel of real water is led down from a higher part of the garden, there stands a length of bamboo that the rain and the stream together keep slowly at work, and it is worth waiting for, because it is the one thing in this whole still place that moves of its own accord and makes, every so often, a sound. The water trickles into the open upper end of a pivoted bamboo tube and fills it until the weight of the water tips the tube down and pours it out, and the empty bamboo swings back and falls against a stone beneath it with a single hollow knock, and then begins, patiently, to fill again. It was first meant, long ago, to startle the deer away from the gardens. Now it is kept for the sound alone. It is a remarkable thing, that knock, in a garden otherwise given over so completely to softness. All morning the rain has been making its many gentle sounds, the hiss and the patter and the run, none of them with any clear beginning or end, and then, into all that softness, at intervals no one can quite predict, comes this one firm, hollow wooden note, and falls, and is gone, and the softness closes over it again. Far from breaking the quiet, it seems to deepen it, the way a single far-off sound at night makes you aware of how silent everything else has become, and one finds oneself, after a while, half waiting for it, and a little glad each time it comes, standing here and there about the garden. At the turnings of the paths and beside the water are the stone lanterns, squat and heavy and dark, each one a little tower of carved granite with a hollow chamber near its top where, on certain evenings, a small flame would once have been set. They are not lit this morning, and they will not be lit, but they do not need to be lit to do their quiet work. Capped and shouldered with green moss, streaked dark with the running rain, they stand among the wet leaves like patient old figures who have been waiting so long and so contentedly that the waiting itself has become a kind of peace, and the garden would feel, without them, somehow less attended, less companionable, more alone. The trees and shrubs of the garden are themselves a kind of slow sculpture, for almost none of them have been left to grow as they pleased. The pines have been pruned, year upon year, branch by branch, until they hold the open, layered, slightly windswept shape that a much older pine on an exposed shore might come to by itself in a century. and the low rounded shrubs have been clipped so smooth and so patiently that they read less as bushes than as soft green boulders, or as low hills, or as the rounded backs of sleeping animals half sunk in the moss. None of this clipping is meant to look clipped. It is meant to look like nature, but nature improved, slowed, and held still at its most pleasing moment. There is a principle at work in all of this that the makers of these gardens held to almost without exception, and it is the gentle avoidance of the even and the matched. The stones are set in 3s and 5s rather than in 2s and 4s. The islands are of different sizes. The bridge meets the bank at one point and the island at another, never quite squarely. Nothing is centered and nothing is mirrored, and no line is allowed to answer another line exactly. To a stranger, it can look careless, even accidental, but it is the opposite of careless. It is a long and deliberate turning away from the stiffness of perfect balance, in the belief, never quite spoken, but everywhere acted upon, that the living world is never symmetrical, and that a made thing comes closest to beauty when it remembers this. And there is the matter of the empty places, which are not empty at all. Between the stones and the trees, and the careful plantings, there are wide, quiet reaches of nothing in particular, of plain raked gravel, of still gray water, of moss with not a single feature upon it, and these spaces have been shaped and kept as deliberately as the rocks. A garden such as this understands that the eye needs somewhere to rest, that a thing is seen best when there is quietness around it, that the silence between two notes is part of the music, and so it gives, between each thing worth looking at, a generous measure of nothing to look at, and the morning rain, falling evenly over the full and the empty alike, makes no distinction between them at all. All of these things, the pond and its islands, the bridge and the stones, the borrowed hills and the raked gray sea, and the patient clipped trees, were not gathered here to tell a story, or to teach a lesson, or to stand for any single idea that could be set down in a sentence. They were gathered to make a place, a particular place, that would reward the long, slow attention of someone with nowhere else to be, and that would give back to such a person a little of the stillness that had been put into the making of it. We are this morning exactly such a person. We have nowhere else to be, and the garden, sensing this in its patient way, has begun very quietly to give that stillness back. If there is one thing above all others that a morning like this one belongs to, it is the moss. For the moss has been waiting all the dry days for exactly this, and now that the rain has come, it has woken into its fullest and deepest self. In the dry spells of summer, the moss of a garden can fade and flatten and turn a tired grayish green, holding on, only just, waiting, but let the rain fall steadily for a morning, and the whole green carpet of it lifts and swells and brightens, drinking the water in through every soft blade and fiber, until the ground itself seems to glow with a low green light, and the garden, which is gray overhead and gray across the water, is green, intensely green, underfoot. It would be wrong to think of all this moss as a single thing, a green that is only green. For once you have begun to look closely, and a rainy morning is the time to look closely. The moss resolves into many mosses, dozens of them, each with its own habit and its own particular shade. There is a moss like fine short velvet that lies close and even over the open ground, and a moss like tiny stars that gathers in the damp seams between stones, and a moss like miniature ferns that climbs the north side of an old trunk, and a moss like soft green cushions that swells up in the deepest shade, and the boundaries between them shift and blend so gradually that the whole becomes a single living surface made of countless small differences. The moss did not always have the place it holds in gardens now, and there is a quiet history in that. In their beginnings, many of these gardens were swept clean of moss, which was thought of as a sign of neglect, something to be scraped from the stones and weeded from the gravel. But the climate of these hills, mild and shaded and wet for much of the year, loved moss more than the gardeners disapproved of it. And in some places, especially where the upkeep faltered through hard years or quiet centuries, the moss simply won, spreading over the ground and the roots and the lower stones until the garden was more moss than anything else. And then, in time, the eye that had once seen neglect learned to see beauty instead, and what had been a defeat was received gracefully as a gift. There is a famous garden, not far from where we are imagining ourselves to be, that is given over to moss so completely that it has come to be known simply as the Moss Temple, where well over 100 kinds of moss are said to grow across the shaded ground beneath the trees, around a pond shaped, by old design, like a certain written character. People come from a long way off to walk its path slowly and in silence, and the thing they remember afterward is almost never a single stone or a single view, but the green itself, the depth and softness and endless variation of it, the sense of standing inside a color rather than merely looking at one. On a morning like this, every garden with moss in it becomes, for a few wet hours, a small moss temple of its own. The moss is, in a sense, time made visible, and that may be part of why it moves us so. A stone can be set in an afternoon, and a tree can be planted in a morning, but moss cannot be hurried into being. It arrives only where the conditions have been right and patient for a long time, where the shade has been kept, and the damp has been steady, and no foot has trodden, and no hand has disturbed. Season after season after season, to walk beside a deep bed of old moss is to walk beside a quiet record of many years of being left alone in the right way. And the rain, which is the oldest friend the moss has, falls on it this morning as it has fallen on it 10,000 mornings before, asking nothing, changing nothing, simply keeping the long green patience fed. Let us turn our attention for a while to the water, which on a morning like this is busy in a dozen quiet ways at once. The rain comes down into the pond and stipples its gray surface all over with fine overlapping rings, so that the water never quite holds still long enough to mirror anything cleanly, and it runs off the broad leaves in heavy single drops that fall with a deeper sound, and it gathers along the eaves of the veranda and lets go in a slow, steady row of drips that mark a softer, nearer rhythm than the rain itself. And it slides down the trunks and the lanterns and the stones in thin, bright threads, and it trickles somewhere into the bamboo fountain, which fills and tips and knocks and fills again. When the rain eases for a moment, as it does from time to time, falling off to the faintest drizzle, the pond grows calmer, and its surface begins, hesitantly, to give back the world above it. The dark shapes of the trees appear in it upside down, and the pale gray of the sky, and the dim line of the misted hills, all of it softened and darkened and very slightly stirred, a second garden lying beneath the first, quieter even than the one we sit in. And then the rain gathers itself again and comes down a little harder, and the rings spread, and the reflection scatters into 1,000 pieces, and the second garden dissolves back into plain gray water, waiting patiently for the next lull to call it up once more. Beneath that shifting surface, in the dark, cool water, the carp are moving slowly, the way everything in this garden moves slowly, They are great old fish, some of them, broad and unhurried, their backs a dim red or a clouded white or a deep mottled gray, and they pass below the rain rings like slow thoughts passing below the surface of a quiet mind, appearing for a moment as a soft shape near the surface and then sinking again, without haste, into the darker water beneath. They are not waiting to be fed this morning, and no one has come to feed them, and so they simply go on with the long, slow business of being fish in a cold pond in the rain, which seems to suit them, and which suits the morning perfectly well. Among the dark greens of the pines and the moss, there are, here and there, the maples, and although their great hour is the autumn, when they turn the whole of a garden to fire, they have a quieter beauty now, in the wet green of an out-of-season morning. Their leaves are a soft, fresh green, thin and many-fingered, and they hold the rain in a particular way, each leaf bending a little under the weight of its own gathered drop, and then springing back, very gently, when the drop runs off, so that the whole tree seems to be breathing slowly, leaf by leaf, in the steady fall of the water. To stand beneath a wet maple in the rain, looking up through the green, is one of the small free pleasures the morning is handing out to anyone willing to be still enough to take it. Low among the shaded stones grow the ferns, which love the rain almost as much as the moss does, and which uncurl and spread their fronds in the wet shade with a patient green confidence. There are little ones tucked into the seams of the rocks where a handful of soil has gathered, and larger ones arching out over the edge of the path, and all of them are beaded this morning along every frond and every fine division of every frond, so that when the faint light catches them, they seem strung with the smallest beads of glass. They ask for nothing but shade and damp, and to be left alone, and a garden such as this, on a morning such as this, gives them all three in full measure. Once in a long while, from one of the dark glossy shrubs near the water, a single camellia flower lets go and falls, whole and heavy, onto the moss below, where it lies face up in the green, a deep soft red, holding a little pool of rain in its cupped petals. The camellia is loved and a little feared in these gardens, for it does not wither on the branch and drop its petals one by one, as a gentler flower might. It lets go whole at the full height of its bloom, the entire flower released together in one slow motion, and there is something in that, in the wet red flower lying perfect and finished on the green moss in the rain, that is almost too quietly affecting to look at for very long. All of this wet green abundance, the moss and the ferns, and the dripping maples, and the dark shining shrubs, would be too much perhaps, too lush and too crowded, were it not held and quieted by the gray, by the soft even grayness of the rain and the mist and the low cloud that lies over everything and drains the loudness out of every color. The gray is the garden's other half this morning, the still and modest partner to all that green, and the two of them together, the deep green below and the soft gray above and between, make the particular and gentle and slightly sorrowful beauty that these gardens were always best at, the beauty of things seen quietly, in soft light, through falling water, by someone in no hurry to be anywhere else. And so the middle of the morning passes, if it can be said to pass at all, for nothing here marks its passing. The rain falls, and the moss drinks, and the carp turns slowly in the dark water, and the drops gather and fall from the eaves, and the bamboo fills and tips and knocks and fills, and the mist thickens a little, and then thins a little, and then thickens again. And not one of these things is in any hurry, and not one of them expects anything of us. We have been sitting on the veranda now for a long time without once thinking to count it, which is perhaps the surest sign that the garden has begun to do its slow work on us, loosening, very gently, our grip on the hour. Off to one side of the main garden, behind a low woven fence and a simple gate of bamboo and twig, there is another, smaller garden, quite different in feeling from the broad pond garden we have been sitting beside, and it is worth rising, at last, and going slowly toward it, keeping under the eaves where we can. This is the tea garden, the roji, a word that means something close to the dewy ground or the dewy path, and it is not a garden made to be looked at from a distance at all. It is a garden made to be walked through, slowly, on the way to somewhere, and the somewhere is a small plain hut at the end of it, where, on other days, tea would be quietly made and quietly drunk. The whole purpose of this little path, the masters of tea believed, was preparation, the slow setting down of the outer world before entering the still small room where the tea was kept. To walk the roji was to be quieted by degrees, stone by stone, turning by turning, the closeness of the planting shutting out the wider view, the need to watch one's footing on the wet stones, drawing the mind down out of its chatter and into the simple fact of the next step and the next. By the time a guest reached the hut, the idea was the marketplace and the road, and the 100 small worries of the day would have been left behind somewhere among the stones, rinsed off, like dust, by the dew the garden was named for. Partway along the path there is a simple shelter, little more than a roof of bark, and a narrow bench of split wood, where a guest who arrived early might sit and wait, out of the weather, until it was time to go on. It is the plainest seat imaginable, worn smooth and silver by long use and by many rains, and there is room on it for 2 or 3 people to sit quietly side by side and say very little. We will sit here for a moment ourselves, on the dry bench under the dripping bark roof, with the wet green path running on ahead of us and the rain falling all around the shelter, and we will let the morning hold us here, in no hurry at all to reach the hut at the end. At the end of the path, low and small among the wet greenery, stands the tea hut itself, and it is a building made on purpose to look as humble as it possibly can. Its walls are of earth and straw. Its roof is of thick thatch, gone dark and soft with the rain. Its few small windows are latticed with bamboo and papered over, and there is nothing about it that boasts or shines or asks to be admired. This was the whole intention. The masters of tea prized a beauty they called wabi, the beauty of the plain, the worn, the modest and the unassuming, the beauty of a thing that has let go entirely of any wish to impress. And a small rough hut in the rain at the end of a mossy path is very nearly the purest example of it there is. The doorway by which a guest would enter the hut is a famous and curious thing, for it is very small, a low square opening set close to the ground, so low that no one, however grand, can pass through it without first kneeling down and bowing the head and going in almost on hands and knees. This was meant. Through that small door, the Lord laid down his rank with his sword at the entrance, and the merchant his wealth, and the scholar his learning, and all who entered came in alike, humbled to the same low posture, reduced, for the length of a bowl of tea, to the plain and equal fact of being a person in a small, quiet room out of the rain. There is a great gentleness, when you think about it, hidden inside that uncomfortable little door. There is a whole way of seeing, gathered up in these gardens and these huts, that prizes exactly the things a brighter and busier taste would throw away. It loves the faded over the fresh, the asymmetrical over the even, the worn handle and the cracked bowl mended with care over the flawless new one, the dim corner over the lit one. It finds more beauty in a mossy stone than in a polished jewel, more in the gray of old wood than in the gleam of new, more in a single branch than in a whole bouquet, and more, always more, in what is suggested and half seen than in what is shown plainly and laid bare. The rain and the mist this morning are, in a sense, its natural weather, softening, dimming, half concealing, leaving everything a little to the imagination. A writer of the last century, mourning a little the bright electric world that was coming in, set down a long and loving essay in praise of shadows, in which he argued that the old beauty of his country had lived not in bright things, but in dim ones, in the soft gloom of deep eaves and paper windows and lamplit alcoves, in lacquer that was made to be seen by candlelight, in gold that was meant to gleam faintly out of the dark rather than to blaze. A garden in the rain is the outdoor cousin of that dim and shadowed beauty, and a temple garden under low gray cloud, with its colors hushed and its far edges lost in mist, would have been, to his eye, very close to perfect, a place where nothing glares, and everything is softened, and the loveliest things keep a little of themselves back in the shade. From somewhere beyond the garden, carried softened and rounded through the rain, there comes the sound of a temple bell, a single great bronze note struck slowly, not rung in a peal, but sounded once, and then, after a long pause, once again. It is the deepest and slowest sound the morning has, and it does not hurry the rain or interrupt it, but seems to come from underneath it, a low bronze swell that rises and fills the wet air and then fades, very gradually, over many seconds, into the patter of the rain, so slowly that one can never quite say at what moment it has finally gone. We do not know what the bell is marking, an hour, a service, some old observance, and it does not matter. It is enough that it sounds and fades, and after a while sounds again. The gardener has come nearer now, working his slow way along the edge of the tea garden, and we can see him a little better, though still only as a quiet figure in a straw rain cape and a broad woven hat, bent to his work with his back to us, as the figures in these places always seem to be. He is doing nothing dramatic. He lifts a few sodden leaves from where they have blocked a small stone channel, so the rainwater can run on freely. He eases a leaning stepping stone back to its level with the side of his foot. He gathers a fallen branch and sets it aside. It is the endless small mending that a garden needs, and he does it without hurry and without any sign that he finds it dull, as though the doing of it were itself a kind of rest. It is the same garden in every season, and yet it is never the same garden twice, and the people who tend it have always known this and built it into the very idea of the place. In the spring there is the brief and aching bloom of the cherry, and then the slow drift of its petals onto the moss. In the high summer, the green grows heavy and deep, and the cicadas fill the heat with their long, dry song. In the autumn, the maples burn and let go their fire leaf by leaf onto the water. And in the winter, the snow lies in soft caps on the lanterns, and the stones and silences everything beneath it. A morning of steady rain like this one belongs to none of those great moments, and so to all of them. An in-between morning, a plain green pause, the garden simply being itself with no particular show to put on. There is a tenderness in the old taste of these gardens toward exactly this, toward the passing and the impermanent, toward the fact that nothing here will hold. The petal falls, the leaf turns, the snow melts, the dew dries, the moss outlives the gardener, and the garden itself, for all its careful tending, is slowly going back, stone by stone and season by season, toward the wild green hill it was made out of. Far from being a sorrow to be hidden, this passing was felt to be the very heart of the beauty, the thing that made a cherry blossom worth more than a paper flower, precisely because it would be gone in a week, and the gentle awareness of it, the quiet ache of loving what will not last, has a name, and was thought of not as sadness exactly, but as a kind of deep and grateful attention to the world. Let us turn back now, slowly, the way we came, along the dewy path and out through the little bamboo gate, and let us return to the broad veranda above the pond, where we began, for the late morning is settling in, and the rain shows no sign at all of stopping. Nothing has changed in our absence, and that is exactly as it should be. The pond is still gray and stippled. The islands still keep their old slow wishes. The carp still turn in the dark water. The moss still drinks. The bamboo still fills and tips and knocks. And the bell, somewhere beyond the trees, sounds its single bronze note once more into the rain and lets it fade. We take our place again at the worn rail, and we settle, and we look out at all of it, and we let the morning carry on without us. And now the morning has reached its quietest hour, the long gray middle of it, when the rain has neither strengthened nor stopped, but settled into a steady, even fall that seems as though it could go on, gently, forever. There is nothing left to see that we have not already seen, and nothing left to do that we were ever going to do. And so there is only this, the sitting, and the looking, and the listening, and the slow, soft falling of the rain over everything, over the pond, and the moss, and the dark stones, and the dim far hills, falling and falling and falling, in no hurry at all, asking nothing of us, asking nothing of anyone. Listen, if you like, to the rain, the way it makes not one sound, but many, all of them soft, all of them blending. There is the wide and even hiss of it across the surface of the pond, and there is the patter, a little heavier, on the broad wet leaves, and there is the slow steady dripping from the eaves just above us, nearer and clearer than the rest, and there is the thin trickle of it running away along the stone channels, and under all of it, the deep low breath of the rain on the moss and the earth. And these sounds together make a kind of soft gray blanket of sound, with no edges and no end, laid gently over the whole of the morning. And every so often, into all that soft gray sound, comes the one clear note, the hollow wooden knock of the bamboo fountain far off across the garden, as it fills and tips and pours and swings back against its stone. You need not watch for it. You need not wait for it. Let it come when it comes, and let it go when it goes. The bamboo fills and tips and knocks and fills again, and the rain goes on falling around it, and somewhere beyond the trees, the great bell sounds its single bronze note once more and fades, and the morning holds all of these sounds together, the soft and the clear and the deep, and lets them rise and fall and rise again, slowly, slowly, with no beginning and no end. The mist has been thickening, slowly, while we sat, and now it has begun to close the garden in, drawing nearer across the pond, softening the far shore until it is only a suggestion, then taking the far shore altogether, then reaching the islands and folding them gently away, so that the world grows smaller and softer and closer around us by quiet degrees. There is no loss in it. What the mist takes, it takes kindly, and what it leaves, the near moss and the near stones, and the gray water just below, and the steady rain, is enough, is more than enough, is everything we need. Let the far things go. Let the mist have them. There is nowhere we have to see to, and nothing we have to keep in view. If your eyes have grown heavy, let them close. There is nothing here that you will miss. The rain will go on falling, whether you watch it or not, and the moss will go on drinking, and the carp will go on turning slowly in the dark water below, and the bamboo will go on filling and tipping and knocking, and none of it needs to be seen by you to go on being exactly what it is. The garden has kept itself, quietly, through 1,000 years of mornings with no one watching at all, and it will keep itself through this one. You may lay the watching down. You have carried it long enough. Let your breath go slow now, as slow as the rain, as slow as the drip from the eaves, in and out, and in and out, with a long, soft pause at the turning of each one, the way the bamboo fountain pauses, full and still, before it tips. Breathe in with the gathering of the water, and out with the pouring of it, and let the knock of the bamboo, whenever it comes, be only the gentle marking of another breath gone by, another small measure of the morning let quietly go. There is so much time. There is all the time there is. The rain has all morning, and the morning has all day, and none of it is waiting on you. The light, such as it is, has not changed in hours, and it will not change now. This soft and sourceless gray that lies so kindly over everything and casts no shadow and hurries nothing toward evening. It is a light that holds the morning still, that keeps it from tipping over into afternoon, that lets the hours pool and gather instead of running away. And it is, of all the lights there are, perhaps the gentlest to fall asleep in. No glare to push against the eyelids, no bright sun moving across a wall to mark the time. Only this even, patient, shadowless gray, and the rain inside it, falling and falling and falling, soft and slow and gray, over the green and the stone and the still gray water. Perhaps, if you are still a little awake, you can let the garden come apart now into its softest pieces, and let each one go. Let go of the gate, dark and wet, far behind us at the edge of the world. Let go of the long path and its careful stones. Let go of the basin, brimming and overflowing in the rain. Let go of the islands and their old slow wishes, folded away now in the mist. Let go of the bridge and the lanterns and the dewy path and the small plain hut at the end of it. Let each one soften and dim and drift off into the gray until there is nothing left but the moss and the rain and your own slow breathing, and not even very much of those. The rain is falling. The moss is drinking it in. The carp are turning, slow and dark, in the deep, cool water. The bamboo is filling, and will tip, and will knock, once, softly, far away, and will begin again to fill. The mist lies over the pond, and the bell, beyond the trees, has long since faded into the rain. Everything is here, and everything is quiet, and everything is taken care of, and there is nothing at all that you need to hold. The garden is keeping itself. The rain is keeping the garden, and the long gray morning is keeping all of it, and you as well, gently, in the soft and shadowless light, for as long as you would like to stay. So stay then, as long as you like, here at the edge of the gray garden in the rain, and sleep if sleep is coming, for it has been coming for a while now, softly, the way the mist came, by quiet degrees. There is no end to this morning that you need to wait for. The rain will keep falling, soft and slow and even, long after you have drifted off, and the moss will keep its deep green patience, and the carp will keep their slow dark rounds, and the bamboo will keep its gentle count of the hours no one is counting. Rest now. The garden is in no hurry, and neither any longer are you. The rain on the pond, the drip from the eaves, the knock of the bamboo far away, the deep green moss drinking, the slow dark carp turning, the soft gray mist over everything, the rain on the pond, the drip from the eaves, the knock of the bamboo far away, softer now and softer, and the rain still falling, gentle and gray and slow, over the garden and over the water, and over the long, quiet, unhurried morning, falling and falling and falling, while you rest, and while the garden keeps, and while the morning holds you softly in the gray, and the rain goes on, over the moss and the gray water, and the dark patient stones, over the islands folded away in the mist, over the bridge and the basin and the long, careful path, over the small plain hut and the great bronze bell, over the whole of the old green garden that has kept itself through 1,000 such mornings and will keep itself through 1,000 more. The rain goes on, soft and slow and gray and without end. There is nothing more to see. There is nothing more to do. There is only the rain and the green and the gray and the rest. Sleep now. The garden will hold the morning. The garden will hold it all. You've reached the end of tonight's archive. If you're still awake, thank you for staying. And if you drifted off somewhere in the dark, then it did its work. Rest now. The next chapter will be here when you are. Sleep well. This has been Archive Whispers.